All right, it's time for the weekly news update. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing good, Jake. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Got a big story. Everyone's talking about it in the news, at least as of recording this, that big shooting out in Sacramento. A certain senator from California made headlines with her response to that shooting, and you wrote a piece about it, Steve, if you want to tell us about it.
Yeah, so Dianne Feinstein, who's the Democratic, she's the senior senator from California, in response to this shooting in Sacramento, where 6 people were killed and 12 more were injured. She immediately called for, as has become sort of common now, new gun control legislation at the federal level. Of course, she called for universal background checks, an assault weapons ban, a ghost gun ban, and magazine limitations. But of course, the problem with that, or the issue at hand there, is that California already has all of those policies in place inside the state. And obviously they didn't stop this shooting from happening. She put out this statement, of course, before also that there were any details about what had happened, really. There were no suspects apprehended at the point. There have been now 3 people arrested in connection to this shooting. 2 of them are convicted felons. One who was actually sentenced to 10 years in jail in 2018, but I guess was released early against the wishes of the DA's office in his local part of California. But obviously, felon in possession charges against 2 of the suspects, and also a machine gun charge, possession of a legal machine gun against one of the suspects. So they had already broken several federal gun laws, in addition to obviously a myriad of local laws against murdering people, to put it bluntly. And so, this is something that we talk about a lot in gun politics, is this debate over how to stop mass shootings, and especially when they happen in places that have strict gun laws already. Commonly, you'll see gun control activists advocate for those same gun laws, but federalized. Their claim is that that they're being basically California is being disserved by their neighbors, or at least by states elsewhere in the country. And so that's effectively what Feinstein was arguing here.
Yep. You saw it wasn't just limited to her. The president came out and made a statement that was similar, basically reiterating the same policies that he said for the last, several public appearances where he's touched on guns. He just, lays out liability for gun makers, background checks, assault weapons ban, the usual. So in a way, it was sort of a messaging discipline among Democratic politicians afterwards, because they all just said the same thing in response to the shooting before we knew details. And as you pointed out, there were already several federal laws that were violated for this shooting. So it wouldn't have really made a difference anyway.
It's always interesting because obviously a lot of Republicans will get criticism for, the refrain of offering thoughts and prayers. That's become is sort of a default position for a lot of pro-gun politicians in the wake of mass shootings. But now the default position from gun control advocates in the wake of these shootings is to just list off their policy priorities that they want instituted regardless of what has happened in the shooting. I mean, obviously this shooting, there's no evidence at all that anyone involved bought a gun across state lines and then took it into California. And of course, there's also the issue of like Nevada and Oregon, they have universal background check laws as well. So the direct neighbors, unless these guys were from, went to Arizona, which I mean is possible, but nobody has actually presented any evidence of that being the case. And they wouldn't be legally allowed to buy guns in Arizona anyway, because they were prohibited under federal law. This is where like a lot of these things fall apart under inspection. This has become the default response to a mass shooting, and it doesn't matter where it takes place or what the details were. The response is we need to pass these our top priorities if you're a gun control advocate. That's the answer, even though in this case, from what we know, these were, I believe also there's a report that the guns were, at least one of the guns was stolen, which is another illegal. I mean, these guys committed probably a dozen different crimes before they even started shooting at people, both federal and state crimes, right? So it's a little bit hard to believe that passing more federal gun laws would have had an effect on this particular shooting. And, everyone's been calling this a mass shooting as well. And, that's another conversation we can get into real briefly here, which is like, it's not entirely clear this is a mass shooting in the sense that most people would understand that term. Because what happened in this situation was there was a fight outside of a nightclub at 2 a.m. That apparently escalated into gunfire. It sounds more like a shootout. And now it happened in a crowded area, and it sounds like there were quite a lot of innocent victims, which is horrendous. But this is different from, your Sandy Hook or Parkland type shooting, but it's being labeled in the same way and bunched together, which has become a common thing in media as well. And especially since most major media outlets changed the definition of mass shooting years ago. I mean, if you look at Mother Jones, which has, I think, the fairest definition of what most people would understand a mass shooting as, which is like a public killing that where 4 or more people are killed, is essentially the FBI definition of mass murder, but committed with a firearm, and one that doesn't involve things like drug disputes or gang wars or those types of crimes, which are obviously still horrendous and tragic, but different from what most Americans understand a mass shooting to be, because the random nature of a mass shooting, the random public nature of it is sort of unique in the American psyche, I think. And you get a lot of people misled by the way these get labeled, because that, now they get, the argument is that one of these happens every day, but I think most people, and I think that hurts the credibility of a lot of media, because most people understand intuitively that something like Las Vegas does not happen every day in the United States. Right? I mean, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It not only does it hurt the credibility of media for people that are kind of paying attention to that distinction, but also muddies the water for policy discussions and response, because as you said, there's a very different root cause of a dispute on the corner or a dispute outside of a bar that escalates and turns into a quick act of violence versus someone that may or may not be under the radar for most of their life that suddenly just goes to a public place and starts gunning down innocent people. Both are obviously horrible. No one likes to see anyone get shot. But the policy response to both of those situations is going to be very different. And the fact that this new definition where it's just, 4 or more people getting shot in an incident, it sort of obfuscates both of those. And you don't really have a clear policy response to that, because obviously they're very different responses for very different causes.
Yeah. I mean, we had Professor James Allen Fox on the show, a couple months back, who runs the database for the Associated Press on mass shootings. And they used a definition closer to what Mother Jones has. And he said, look, it's obviously tracking 4 or more shot can be a valuable data to have.
Sure.
But it's clearly different. Most of those shootings are very different from what the average American would understand as a mass shooting, and that's where you get into the problem. And like you said, there are also very different solutions to sort of a random individual trying to kill as many people in public as they possibly can, and a fight escalating into deadly violence. Or drug-related killings, which all have different solutions and different causes, and lumping them all together doesn't really accomplish very much, I don't think. And that's where you start to run into a lot of problems. And that's when the only reason, the only thing served, the only benefit from doing it that way is really to just push a broad agenda. Because, obviously, if you think that these policies are going to generally help with preventing gun violence, then you're going to want to implement them regardless of the instigating incident, right? And that's sort of the approach you're seeing with gun control advocates and how they respond to this shooting in Sacramento, I think.
No, I think that's right. I do want to give some media, at least some media outlets, a little bit of credit in this incident because, a lot of times they'll just parrot whatever the politicians say, oh, we need more gun laws, and they won't really air the other side. But I did at least see, I believe it was the Sacramento Bee, at least point out after some of these claims were made that, look, California already had all these laws in place, which I think is worth noting because a lot of people, particularly on the pro-gun side, can get a little jaded by media outlets and coverage of this stuff. But I do think it's worthwhile to point out, in this case, they at least pointed out that, hey, look, all these policies you're calling for are already the law in the state where this incident happened, which is good reporting, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's a necessary thing to do. I mean, I think it's difficult to write about what Feinstein and the president had said without noting that, look, where this happened, they have exactly the policies that you're proposing. So, and like I said, obviously the gun control advocates have a counter to that, which is that the looser laws in other states are undermining the strict laws in California. People can make up their own minds about how convincing that argument is. And it sort of, I think, also undermines the idea of having strict gun laws in your state, right? I mean, if they're not, what's the point? If you're saying that they can't stop these shootings because of what the laws are in other states, it's just kind of an odd argument. But certainly there's plenty of people who find it has more credibility and credence than I do. So that's just my personal insight on that particular point. But yeah, so we're going to keep on top of this. I think also it's important to note that none of those policies that the president or Dianne Feinstein have advocated for are going to pass in Congress anytime soon. It's just not going to happen. And depending on how the midterms go, which right now it sure looks like they're kind of go well for the Republican Party at this point, based on polling. Things can change certainly, but these policies aren't going anywhere anytime soon at the federal level. And that's important to note too. I mean, this is just to give the audience some clarity on the actual practicality of implementing the things that Dianne Feinstein had called for.